Back when I was in high school, I was lucky enough to have a 3D animation teacher. Inevitably, someone asked him what his least favorite animated film was, and he said it was Doogal. The 2006 box office flop was a particularly bad case of unnecessary localization, boring story structure, and the rapid development of 3D animation technology leaving smaller studios in the dust. However, to truly understand this disaster, we must go back to the far past of the 1960s. The source material for Doogal began its life as a stop-motion TV series called Le Manger Enchanté, which were short 5-minute episodes produced by Serge Denot for the French TV network ORTF, running from 1964 to 1974. The first 100 episodes were produced in black and white. Then, once Serge left, the series transitioned to color. The show itself was well received in France and eventually wound up getting picked up by the BBC, where the first instance of localization mutation began. Initially, the Magic Roundabout was rejected by the BBC on the grounds that it was charming but difficult to dub into English. But then, they had an epiphany and thought, what if we didn't translate the script at all? So the BBC hired Eric Thompson to write and narrate over the original footage. They changed the characters' names to be more British, then added in some jokes for the parents watching the show, and boom, instant cult classic in the UK. After such success, it was only a matter of time before there was an adaptation of Doogal for the silver screen. And there was one in 1970, called Doogal and the Blue Cat. It was actually quite faithful to the source material, was done in stop motion, and even tackled themes of racism in it. But that's not the one we're talking about. The original UK production, called The Magic Roundabout, was originally released in 2005 as a joint effort from Pathe, the UK Film Council, with animation done by Action Synthesis. Was this pre-butchered version of the film any good? No. The original cut was mediocre at best. It took the characters from this fairly slice-of-life comedy and shoved them into a generic Find the Three MacGuffins adventure plot. What's more, is that many considered its animation to be subpar, and yeah, when compared to major animated films of that year, some of them being Madagascar, Robots, and Final Fantasy Advent Children. Yeah, people weren't exactly impressed with it already, and that was before it was butchered by the Weinstein Company. Yes, the film was picked up by the Weinstein Company to be localized for American audiences. Some of you may know that at one point Butch Hartman was to write the script. Well, that's only 3% true. Butch only wrote the initial script. Apparently, Harvey Weinstein took the script and had several other writers work on it, creating a so-called Frankenstein's monster of a script for the movie. Couple this with America's bad habit of casting people for star power as opposed to if they fit their roles, and the end result was a movie that can only be described as mid-2000s flavored cringe. So what exactly changed during the localization to take Doogal from a mediocre kids film to one of the worst animated movies of all time? A good chunk of it comes from the casting decisions for the US version. Starting from the top, and probably the most notable, is Doogal himself, whose UK voice actor, Robbie Williams, brings a surprisingly charming take on this sugar-fixated dog.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. What an unforeseeable accident. That's not an easy fix, that. We're looking at a multiple abrasion friction.
Sure, Doogal is rather selfish, but Robbie's delivery gives it a lot of levity to the role. It makes him more comical than Daniel Tay's take on him.
Would you look at that? What an unforeseeable accident. That's a pretty bad flat. We're looking at a multiple abrasion friction gash.
Which sounds more like a bratty little kid. When he's not flatly delivering his lines, of course. The next voice change that really bugged me was the Rabbit Dylan. Bill Nighy's performance in the UK script brings a very clear picture of a laid-back hippie who actually has some decent jokes.
Yeah, it starts with some sweets, man. Maybe an iced bun, and before you know it, you're on 2 bags a day. I know, man, I've been there.
Then there's Jimmy Fallon in the English translation.
Yeah, starts with candy bars, man. Maybe a Snickers fun size, and before you know it, you've eaten all the 3 Musketeers and their families.
Oh, yeah.
who's just all over the place with his accent. Sometimes he's trying to go for that hippie vibe, but other times he goes into sort of a surfer dude. It's generally a lot more flat, and you see this happen with most of the American cast. Some of the lesser offenses is having Whoopi Goldberg as Ermintrude the Cow, which took her operatic prima donna role in the UK script to the more Soul Train style diva in the American version.
When I was on Soul Train, I had all the moves.
Still doesn't make sense why they kept the Toreador March from the original dub, though. The soldier wasn't much of an issue. A few lines were changed to fit the new script, but nothing stand out. Same could be said for Brian the Snail. Funnily enough, the train has less lines in the US script. Perhaps at one point they had him completely silent. I wish they kept it that way. The two characters that retained their voices were Zebedee and Florence.
Doogal, I knew you'd make it.
Though the latter's actress re-recorded her voice in an American accent.
Well, you better not think you're getting some candy just for showing up.
Also, Judi Dench is narrating the story sometimes. I don't know why we needed a narrator. The plot's about as straightforward as things go, and there's no upside to using a narrator in this context at all. Also, they sprinkled in some stock Hanna-Barbera sound effects. No idea why they thought it was needed, but it only happened like a handful of times. So it wasn't annoying, it was just kind of eye-rolling. Now for the big changes that really detracted from the film. The first two cases are adding voices to characters that don't need to be voiced. The first being the moose. It really didn't need a voice. There was a scene where they tried to guess where the moose is trying to tell them something, and it's basically ruined by the horrendous pop cultural references made by said moose. However, that pales in comparison to the infamous skeleton scene. In this one single scene, they reference The Shining, Monty Python, Pirates of the Caribbean, the What's Up commercial, all the while being accompanied by a piece of music that can only be described as discount thriller, which is then followed up with more pop culture references by the main cast, namely A Day of the Dead, 3 Matrix references, and 1 MC Hammer joke, all in the span of 2 minutes. Yet that's only a single instance of pop culture poisoning. The most sustained source of poorly aged pop cultural references is none other than the main villain Z-Bag. He was originally voiced by Tom Baker, and characterized more as a classical villainous wizard, bringing an element of gravitas to the role.
Road will be hard. Pain, misery, and torment will be your constant companion. And your only release will be death.
Ensuring that he seemed like a credible threat. The US version trades that refined characterization for a wisecracking, fourth wall breaking, broken fountain of incessant pop culture jokes that make little sense on account of him being supposedly sealed in the eponymous roundabout for several millennia. I keep harping on this film using pop culture references because of how utterly intrusive and detrimental they are to this story. When you make a pop culture reference like this, you are basically saying, I watched this film that's far better than the one you're currently watching.
You know, there can only be one spring to rule them all. And I am the Lord of the Springs.
Isn't that funny? There's no setup, no punchline, there is only reference. It saps the characters and world out of the story. It pulls you out of the film and shows you just how artificial and insincere the script is. The original version, while pretty bland and rather unfitting for a property that was far more slice of life, was at least a genuine attempt at telling a compelling story. The sad thing is, this could have been avoided had it simply been distributed directly to the US rather than have the Weinstein Company dump money into mangling the script so much. So why do this in the first place? Well, I believe that it had to do with the notion that foreign media had to be Americanized in order to be digestible for the average viewer, which was very prevalent at the time. One only needs to look at anime touched by 4Kids Entertainment to see that. Another reason could have been due to the localization team wanting to make it more like Shrek. But pop culture jokes alone did not make Shrek into the success it was. While ultimately a twist on the classic fairy tale, Shrek did have a sincere theme behind it, whereas this film really didn't. At most, it had an unlikely hero story, but what little of an arc Doogal had was, again, completely undercut by the changes made to the US version. While the Magical Roundabout was never going to really pull in the crowds, the moment the Weinstein Company decided to rewrite the dialogue, this film was destined to fail. Thank you for watching this installment of Doom from the Start. If you have any suggestions for animated films or shows that were destined for failure, leave a comment down below and subscribe for more content like this.